Have you ever expected something to be perfect only to find out it's quite differently in reality? Today we'll go through a famous poem, Living in Sin by Adrienne Rich, who explores this question deeply.
Living in Sin by Adrienne Rich. She had thought the studio would keep itself, no dust upon the furniture of love. Have heresy to wish the taps less vocal, the panes relieved of grime. A plate of pears, a piano with a Persian shawl, a cat stalking the picturesque amusing mouse had risen at his urging. Not that at 5 each separate stair would writhe under the milkman's tramp. That morning light so coldly would delineate the scraps of last night's cheese and 3 septural bottles.
Not on the kitchen shelf amongst the saucers, a pair of beetle eyes would fix her own. Envoy from some village in the moldings. Meanwhile, he, with a yawn, sounded a dozen notes upon the keyboard, declared out of tune, shrugged at the mirror, rubbed his beard, went out for cigarettes. While she, jeered by the minor demons, pulled back the sheets, made the bed and found a towel to dust the tabletop, and let the coffee pot boil over the stove. By evening, she was back in love again. Though not so woolly, but throughout the night, she woke sometimes to feel the daylight coming, like a relentless milkman up the stairs.
According to Poetry Foundation at LitChart, Adrienne Rich was a renowned feminist, poet, scholar, teacher, and critic who had a lifelong journey that significantly influenced her work. Her earliest work, including A Change Your World, 1951, which won the prestigious Yale Young Poet Award, was formally exact and decorous, while her late 1960s and 70s works became increasingly radical in its free verse and feminist political content. She was born in Baltimore, USA. Rich's early poetic influence was largely from her father, who encouraged her to read and write poetry. Her education and personal life experience especially influenced her perspectives. She first attended Roland Park Country School, a girl high school that's dedicated to educating young, strong, independent women. She then graduated from Radcliffe College, where she focused on poetry in an environment where there are no female teachers at all. She was married with an economist and had 2 kids with him. However, she later divorced her husband. During this time and period, she struggled with womanhood and motherhood, shown by many of her poems, such as Diving into the Wreck. In 1966, she became more involved with anti-war, civil rights, and feminist movement due to the societal pressure on women in the 50s and the Vietnam War. According to Georgetown University, Rich's writing style often includes free verse, dialogue, and the intervening of several voices. She evolves from a more tightly constructed traditional rhymed poetry to a more open, loose, and flexible poetic lines. Her work often includes addressing the oppression of women and lesbians. She spreads awareness by writing many influential poems. She was praised for challenging the strict forms of womanhood and feminism and promoting the lesbian continuum, an idea which highlights unity and creativity among women.
As high schoolers, we all went through tough romantic relationships. By reading this poem, we will understand the struggles couples really experience. This poem reflects on the societal norms and expectations for women in the 1950s, such as women's role as housekeepers. There was also a reinforcement in the gender role for women in the 1950s. Women are encouraged to leave the workforce and embrace their roles as wives and mothers. The idea that a woman's most important job was to take care of the children was hardly new, but it began to generate a great deal of dissatisfaction among women who wished for a more fulfilling life. Because of these factors, the feminist movement could be reborn in the 1960s. Adrienne Rich was then inspired to create this poem, which marks the beginning of her feminist ideology. The poem reflects on the societal and cultural context of the 1950s in America. Rich's work foreshadows the feminist movement in the following decades. Structure. The poem tells the story of a woman's experience in a domestic setting in a linear fashion. The poem uses a single stanza, and there are no stanza breaks. This is used to create a sense of uninterrupted flow. It also creates a continuous flow to mirror the monotone nature of a woman's daily life in a domestic setting. We can also see the poem as free verse poetry. This is because there's no specific rhyming patterns, which allows for more flexibility in expression and structure. This also allows Rich to express complex emotions more naturally instead of following the traditional rhyming pattern. Thus, making the poem more relatable and authentic to readers. The poem uses multiple poetic devices to reveal the central message, such as symbolism, metaphor, irony, and personification. Symbolism. This is the use of symbols to express ideas. We see this when Rich says, "She had thought the studio would keep itself, no dust upon the furniture of love." The overall meaning of this sentence is that she believes that the marriage life would be as fun as she does not have to do anything. However, we see it's quite the opposite. We can see that the studio is a symbol of the marriage life. No dust upon the furniture of love is an example. The dust represents when everything becomes dull and boring.
Metaphor refers to words or expression that mean something different from their literal definition. Quote, "The daylight coming like a rentless milkman up the stairs." This is a metaphor because it compares the daylight with the milkman who comes daily. The daylight always comes every morning, just like the rentless milkman who keeps delivering milk. This shows how everyday reality arrives instead of the dreamy, romantic life. You can always expect the milkman and always expect the morning to bring back everyday boring and dull romantic life.
Irony. This is something that speaks to the opposite of what it means. We see this when Rich says in the poem, "Meanwhile, he, with a yawn, sounded a dozen notes upon the keyboard, declared it out of tune, shrugged at the mirror, rubbed his beard, went out for cigarettes." This is situational irony. The man's behavior is ironic because he's always bored and uninterested. He plays a few notes on the piano, then just leaves to buy cigarettes. In a loving relationship, the couples are supposed to be caring and more involved. However, the man is doing his own thing, not helping and ignoring the woman in the house. This shows the difference between the expectations of a romantic partner and the reality of it.
Personification, which is the relation of human qualities to inanimate objects. Quote, "Have Percy, to which the taps less vocal." This is personification because it describes taps as being able to talk like humans. The author gives the tap human trait, which shows how the woman is annoyed by the constant noise and the problems in her home and romantic life. This is very different from the quiet and the perfect life she expected. Quote, "Not that at 5, each separate stair would writhe." This is personification because it gives the stairs a human action as if they can twist and turn like a human. This shows the difference between the woman's expectations and the reality of her life, because the twisting stairs would make it seem like the house is uncomfortable in the morning, just like how the woman's dream life is not as nice as it would be.
Central message. The poem's meaning or central message is the contrast between expectation and reality. In the poem, the poet talks about a woman's expectations of a relationship and contrasts them with the disappointing reality she faces. She does this in an impactful way by using specific words that paint pictures in your head depicting the difference between expectation and reality. She also uses these words to bring enlightenment to her expectations when it's nighttime, but when the daylight comes, they're once again crushed. She's not happy with her love life. Everything around her makes her life dull, even the dust in the kitchen. If your love life is unhappy, everything around you will be nonsense.
Poems and songs often connect and explore similar themes. The song Just a Girl explores similar themes as living in sin. According to Songtell, Just a Girl is sung by the rock band No Doubt. They're a band formed in 1986 in California. They include vocalist Gwen Stefani, guitarist Tom Dumont, bassist Tawny Cannell, and drummer Adrian Young. Gwen Stefani, with her flashy looks, was the voice behind the song Just a Girl. With its catchy but meaningful lyrics, the song was a hit when released in 1995. Just a Girl is a great choice for our poem because it brings the poem meaning into a vision. The song speaks to womanhood and the struggles of a woman as it conveys stereotypes and unreal expectations. Women are trapped in their expected societal role, making them unable to do things they desire. This relates to Rich's poems, which reveals a deeper meaning of women deserving more attention in a household, and they're tired of being in their traditional role. There are 7 elements that the song has that is similar to the poem.
Challenge gender stereotypes. Both the poem and the song try to question the traditional expectations and roles placed on women. "'Cause I am just a girl, a little old me, well do not let me out of your sight," speaks about how she must always be protected because she's a girl. The poem does the same by making the woman complete all the work.
Narrative style in lyric and verse. Both the song and the poem use a narrative style to tell the story of women. In Living in Sin, it creates a continuous flow to mirror the monotonous nature of the woman's daily life in a domestic setting. It especially emphasizes the feeling of being trapped in a dull routine. In Just a Girl, it creates a sense of narrator speaking out loud for herself for her struggle in life where she expected to follow all the traditional rules. By having a continuous flow, audiences are able to connect with the protagonist better.
Theme of disappointment. The song and the poem both explain a sense of disappointment. Living in Sin describes a disappointment within a romantic relationship and the feeling of entrapment within a relationship due to gender stereotypes. In Just a Girl, it describes the limitations imposed on women in relation to the poem.
Use of domestic imagery. Both pieces uses imagery to describe their themes of being trapped in their traditional role. Living in Sin uses the description of the background and the location to showcase the protagonist's disparity. Just a Girl uses imagery more as a backdrop to criticize the societal view of women.
Contrast between expectations and reality. Both the song and the poem highlight the expectations and the actual reality the poet and the singer face. In both pieces of literature, the narrator experiences changes as their lives are not what they expect.
Critique of patriarchal society. Both pieces critique the patriarchal norms and question the power dynamics between men and women. In the poem, the woman always does everything for the man, whereas the man is careless about the relationship with the woman. In the song, there are many instances where the man places a set of rules on women. "I'm just a girl living in captivity, your rule of thumb makes me worrisome" is one of the best examples.
Irony and sarcasm. Both pieces use irony and sarcasm to drive their points. Rich uses irony on romantic ideals and a dull domestic life. No Doubt uses lyrics that express on stereotypes about women.
Both the poem and the song can be related to us as teenagers growing up in the 21st century. Reading and learning about this poem and relating it to a well-known song give us fundamental knowledge of women's rights and feminism. We can relate to the poem and the song to today's active women's rights movement. In 2023, there's a great shift in achieving equal gender rights and removing set women's societal expectations. Adrienne Rich is a great example as she went from being in an unhappy relationship to breaking free and becoming who she truly wanted to be. This shows women are slowly achieving the dream goal of achieving the respect they deserve.
And finally, to end it off, our current social issue. One current social issue that relates to my poem and song is the feminist movement in the world. As many women in this world are faced with discrimination and put in restrictive roles by society. Rich's poem describes the false fantasizing romance that came with the traditional stereotypes set on women. Just a Girl also confronts the stereotypes and limitations placed on women, but in a broader context. They both draw attention to women's struggles in society and their set gender roles as well as stereotypes.
In conclusion, we reflected on the traditional roles for women in both the song and the poem. Today, we stand at a pivotal movement where we are able to finally achieve our dreams of equality. Let's keep the spirit forward and craft a world where every woman's voice can be heard, every right can be upheld. This isn't just history, it's our history. Let's make it extraordinary.